Thanks so much for joining us. So your role is Head of Digital Innovation and Design at RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland. So we'll ask about that in a minute, but I thought to begin with, we'd just throw you straight in at the deep end because you are a banker. And we'll ask you, why do we need banks? In 5 years' time, why do I need a bank?
Yeah, fantastic, and that's a great question. And I'm always reminded of that famous quote from Bill Gates, right, where he says that banking is necessary, but banks aren't. And I'm very conscious of that, right? What people effectively want is the ability to kind of do money and do money well. And historically, that required a bank, right? Because that was your only option. I think today we've seen this blurring line between big techs and fintechs and banks. And actually what people want is just whatever help and support they can, where they can just do money easily and do it very well. That's raised the game, I think, for banks. And we've seen a step change in terms of the service provision that we provide. But in the future, right, customers are going to be pretty agnostic about who serves their needs. It's just got to be easy. It's just got to be good value, and it's got to work in their interests. And if banks can get that right, then they'll still be here in the future. If not, somebody else will come in and provide that service instead.
Yeah, and I know that banks are also starting to use different types of language. So they're talking about innovation, they're talking about startups, they're talking about digital transformation, seamless payments. So this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about contextualizing your role. So head of digital innovation, but also design. What does that actually mean, and what are the layers of that, and what's your role within kind of the organization?
Yeah, sure thing. So as the name sort of suggests, there are three different or constituent parts to my role. The first kind of head of digital is exactly that, right? I'm responsible for all of our customer-facing digital channels. So online banking, mobile banking, all of our websites, our corporate digital platform that we offer to corporate institutions, and I guess I'm ultimately responsible for what is the customer experience like using those channels. Secondarily, I'm responsible for innovation, so that's kind of looking beyond our current service offering and trying to understand where the future is going. Look at disruptive technologies, look at customer behaviors, and really start and think about what's the business model shift that the bank really needs to be focused on to make sure that we continue to be relevant a long way into the future. And a lot of that is how we work with fintechs and other partners in order to really change our service offering. And then the third and final thing is design. And broadly, that's kind of technology architecture, right? How do we construct the bank from a technology perspective so that we can kind of keep delivering in the here and now, but also architect in such a way that it becomes easy for us to integrate and connect with both customers and third parties alike, so that we can start and deliver really value-added services to our customers in the future.
Thanks for that summary. It is really interesting listening to you talk, because to some extent, banks are borrowing or have borrowed some of the language of Silicon Valley, talking about design thinking, architecting, users. So, for a huge organization like Royal Bank of Scotland, and it might be worth actually just giving a brief, background into who Royal Bank of Scotland are and the corporate structure and all of that. But who are your competition today? Is it other banks, or is it large platforms that might be integrating digital payments in the future?
Yeah, sure thing. So if I give a little bit of context, so Royal Bank of Scotland started as an organization way back in the 1700s as a small little regional bank, and it grew to become briefly the world's biggest bank, the RBS Group, and that's what it was when I joined it back in 2008 as a fresh-faced graduate. What effectively happened was we then had the big global credit crunch, and actually RBS as a banking group rapidly started to right size and shrink from this kind of global behemoth that it had become, and actually focus on the core UK retail and corporate banking market. And we recently rebranded to call ourselves NatWest Group to better reflect the major brand that we serve the majority of our customers under. As we've kind of retrenched from our previous kind of global presence, it does make sense for us to still do business in certain international jurisdictions. And RBS International, which is the part of the bank that I'm in, does exactly that. So we sit outside of the UK ring fence, and we're a full service bank, but we provide kind of banking services to international customers, all the way from sort of retail depositors through to small businesses, high net worth clients. The lion's share of what we do is in the kind of institutional space, where we are real specialists in funds banking and depository services, which is effectively providing independent oversight for fund investment activities. So it's a great business to be part of. Relatively complex, and with customers that have got very complicated, often multi-currency needs. But my job is making sure that the bank continues to deliver both a great digital experience now and is looking to the future to ensure that we deliver a relevant experience for them well into the future.
So what does that involve? Because I saw a quick video of you, and you were talking about the kind of partnerships and entrepreneurs and inventors you wanted to work with, and you were talking about you were kind of looking for three things. You were looking for people with an understanding of some of the technical problems banks like NatWest or Royal Bank of Scotland were facing, evidence of how you can solve those problems, capability, and also a cultural fit. And I know there's three different things there, but of course the cultural fit is also a really interesting one, because you do have these kind of, you've got the crypto and the fintech guys that sometimes haven't come from traditional banking, although in the UK they often have. And then you've also got the kind of legacy banks that are trying to adapt to this new reality, or some of these new payment systems going forward. So in terms of kind of working on innovation, who are you partnering with? Who do you meet with every day? What are the kind of conversations you're having, and how is culture changing within the bank?
Yeah, so that's again a great question, and a lot of my time is spent kind of looking outside of the bank, right? Mm-hmm. So I will spend several hours a week having meetings and introductions with the latest new fintech solution provider, and part of that is sometimes trying to work out the difference between, like, where is a solution that's looking for a problem, and where is something that's new that really is on the sweet spot in terms of it solves a pain point for our customers or for our business. And so I guess whenever I have those interactions with fintechs, what I'm looking for is that kind of evidence that this is a real problem solver. This is not just kind of novelty technology that's looking to try and have application. But it actually addresses a need that our customers have. So that's the kind of understanding and the relevance in terms of our business. The cultural fit really is about how well it aligns with what we're about as a group. Fair to say that I think in the past, banks perhaps lost their way temporarily, right? Where it all became about kind of maximizing profit and delivering shareholder value. And maybe sometimes that was at the expense of our customers. Banks have probably learned a very difficult lesson over the past decade. And we recognize that actually, look, the purpose of banks is to deliver value in the societies that you operate, right? And if you're not really enhancing the lives of the customers that you serve, then you have no right to be here and serve them. So the banking group that I represent is very clear about our purpose, right? We only exist to help businesses, people, families to really thrive. And they thrive by improving their financial literacy, improving their relationship with money, and us giving them all the tools that they need to really go on and kind of build successful and balanced lives. And I guess what we're looking for is where technology helps us to do that. Every day, the thing that I'm focused on is, like, does what we're delivering to customers really help them to go on and achieve their ambitions? Does it help improve their financial life? Does it help them build their business? Does it help them meet all of their aspirations? If it does, great, we're interested. If it's about, like, how does it help the bank make a quick buck, that's just not the market that we're in.
That's interesting. And kind of one side of that is also the this discussion on digital transformation, which is happening across industries, but it seems to be happening in banking at a very fast pace as well. So over the past 12 to 18 months, how has COVID-19 kind of affected some of these things, you've been talking about, how you think about pain points, how you think about how the ways of the customer, be it an individual or small business, have changed. Has that influenced your role in terms of innovation or strategy or thinking?
Yeah, it certainly has. So we had seen probably over the past several years this gradual migration towards digital servicing, right? Once upon a time, banking was a very face-to-face kind of human-to-human interaction, right? You went into a branch, you saw a relationship manager. That was the way that banking services were delivered. I think probably ever since 2007, 2008, we've started to see this gradual but increasing move towards digital services. Millennials like me, that's our go-to, right? Like my first port of call to try and get something done is a digital channel, and only will I ever pick up the phone or have to go somewhere if I couldn't achieve it through that channel. So that was something that was happening long before COVID. I think what we saw with the pandemic, where suddenly we're all prisoners in our own home and couldn't go out, like people had to make that shift to digital services. And so we probably saw about 4 or 5 years worth of adoption activity in the space of a couple months. And that shift has been permanent, right? Customers that have adopted digital channels during that period, they're never going back. They're not waiting for the time when they can go and queue in a branch again. They're in those channels. I think what we also saw during COVID, though, was the importance of maintaining that human element in banking. If you think about pre-pandemic, you had people that had a viable job going in that lost it almost overnight, had a viable business, and suddenly that business wasn't viable anymore. And these people were panicked about, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to continue to feed my family in some instances? And digital only service providers really struggled to deliver the support that their customers needed at that time.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, COVID has been this almost light bulb moment around, yes, we're going to continue to enhance our digital services and be a digital first bank. However, that cannot be at the expense of still being a human-centric organization. And actually, in those moments that really matter in customers' lives, they need to know that they're not dealing with a kind of a faceless digital interface, but actually there's real people at the other end of that, and that they can have meaningful dialogue with a company that understands them, that empathizes with them, and will move mountains in order to kind of deliver the services that they need. And so, we, as much as my role is focused on delivering great digital experiences, underlying all of that is still delivering the human empathetic part of the bank, where we can connect with customers on a person-to-person level and deliver the support and help that they really need.
Yeah, so I mean that what you said about adoption during COVID-19, 5 years of adoption within the space of that's fascinating. But there is also underlying this discussion on kind of values and empathy, particularly during COVID-19, which makes total sense, given some of the situations you described. Again, going back to this issue of trust. So, you mentioned you're a millennial and you've grown up during an interesting time, because some people have grown up using platforms like, Facebook or Google, and it's arguable, but many people use these platforms every day, and they trust them, they're familiar with them. And at the same time, there's a generation that's grown up with the banks. And, I'd say, particularly for the younger generation who grew up during the crisis, there's an image problem, and there is an empathy problem. There's also there's even aspects of entrepreneurship. If you want to be an entrepreneur, kind of 10 years ago, you go into digital, you go online, because doing anything bricks and mortar or working with kind of legacy traditional institutions, be it banks or that kind of things, was so difficult. And it does seem like if banks want to compete, if they want to move into this arena, some of the language you're using is actually really important. Having that kind of relationship that new digital banks might not be able to have, and being able to talk to someone at the other end of the bank, but also having digital services that a new generation are familiar with. How is that? I mean, do you think that transition is possible? Because obviously there's two arguments. You've got the blockchain guys, some of the crypto guys, some of the fintech guys, some real intellectuals saying this isn't possible. There's a historical revolution taking place. even if it was possibly possible, there's a lot of people that want to use these other systems? Or do you think from where you're sitting, banks are transitioning, they do get it. They realize that the digital economy is going to be so big that they have a massive opportunity to play a role within it. And the future is going to be much more hybrid, where, as you're kind of hinting at, banks perform like platforms, but also do have the kind of trust to some extent with money and with regulations that the existing banking system used to have. I don't know if that's very well summarized, but I think you can see what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah,
There's a disconnect between the image pre 2008 and what happened post 2008, and you've got these two systems that seem to be conflicting to some extent, and we're all trying to work out which direction it's going to go in.
Yeah, no, I definitely get where you're going with that question, and it's something that banking as an industry is very cognizant of, right? So I think pre the fintech boom, if we call it that, banks' positions were relatively safeguarded, right? Because there wasn't a whole lot of choice in the banking marketplace. There's maybe 4 or 5 big banks in the UK, and it was a relatively closed market. And people just accepted that they had to, at some point, as they kind of matured from childhood through to adulthood, go and open a bank account. That was like one of the key moments in life of, I need to just pick one of these 4 or 5, open a bank account, and then I'm kind of wedded to it for life. And in fact, there's interesting statistics around, you are more likely to change your spouse than you are your banking provider, right? It's that kind of just permanent relationship, right? So I think, up until what I'll call recent times, banks have kind of had that privileged position of like, we can't be disrupted. Suddenly we've had this emergence of fintechs and neobanks and challenger banks, and the playing field has opened up significantly. And now suddenly, consumers are faced with this, well, I don't necessarily need to bank with a traditional bank, or maybe not even a bank at all, right? Like, there's any number of e-money providers where I can have my money sat on a digital service somewhere, and I can get to it when I want to. And you've referenced a couple of platforms that the younger generation have probably got more familiarity and confidence in than they do these kind of banks that their parents had a relationship with, but doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know if you can see the picture on the wall there, but like, so my young kids are growing up in an environment where things like Alexa are just like part of the family, right? It's always been a voice in the kitchen that they can talk to. The platforms that they will become familiar with and conversant with, and start and want to talk to about money, are fundamentally different, right? It will be Alexa, I need some money so I can book a holiday. And if you're not in that channel, then kind of game's over, right? So the bank is starting to recognize we need to be in the channels where customers are. And we already see in other parts of the world, things like WeChat, where it's becoming the super app, right? That customers never need to leave. It's where they do their communication, it's where they book their travel and entertainment, and it's where they do their money. We recognize that actually that's the way that people are changing, right? There's this blurring lines between like, what is my lifestyle, what is my money, what is my kind of social network. It's all going to converge, and that's why it's so important that the bank is architecting in such a way and partnering in such a way that we can seamlessly be where the customer needs us to be. I'm under no illusion that like banking isn't something that people look forward to doing, right? But there's absolutely none of our customers that get up in the morning and are like, today's the day I'm going to do my banking, goody, I can't wait. The reality is that like it shouldn't be a visible part of people's lives, right? Money, unfortunately, is something that a lot of us don't have a great relationship with, and is a cause of anxiety and stress. But actually, what the bank should be looking to do is help people to kind of get their relationship with money in a good place, so that they don't have to worry about it, so that it's kind of being taken care of, and you can get on with living a human-centered life, doing the things that you want to do, because someone's got your back on the money front. And I think that's what we're trying to move our services towards, is really intelligent use of AI, so that we're working constantly on a customer's behalf, giving you the prompts when you need prompts to take action, but otherwise like trying to give you that peace of mind that that money is being taken care of, and you can just go and focus on things that really matter to you. So that's kind of where we're headed. That's where we want to take our services. I think, you know, maintaining customer trust will be fundamental to that, and making sure that we design in such a way that we can work seamlessly with our, you know, partners and kind of non-bank participants to really deliver banking in the channels where customers want us to be.
No, thanks for that summary. So it definitely seems that the banks are very aware and probably have quite smart response based on some of the arguments you just put forward to the cultural and historical issues and platform-based issues, as well as the technical issues. But going on to the technical issues, because you mentioned WeChat, and you know there has been this discussion on the size of digital payments in China, you know, predating the launch of the digital yuan, and how much transactions, the scale of the transactions taking place there across digital devices. And I've noticed that one of the things all of the banks are looking at, from banks such as RBS to challenger banks, is, you know, minimizing the amount of friction on a payment system, which I think is how you put it in one video. So, you know, I know you're looking at digital solutions. I think you mentioned at one point that you know, physical cards might at some point go away. So we're not just living in a cashless society, we're living in a sort of cardless society. Why do you think payments and frictionless payment and seamless payment is really important for all banks, you know, from emerging fintechs to large organizations such as RBS?
Yeah, so whether it's banking or whether it's any other part of our life, right? Nobody wants complexity. Nobody wants a process to be difficult, right? Like, I just want to be able to get to my solution and do it as easily as possible. When it comes to money, though, I need to have the assurance that it's safe and not just anybody can kind of pay money away from my account. And this is the real great opportunity that digital gives us, particularly in the payment space, because it allows us to make the process kind of frictionless and easy for the customer, but then probably more secure than it's ever been. Right? Like you'll be familiar with kind of 2-factor or 3-factor type authentication, right? And there are different levels within that. There's kind of something that the customer knows, like a PIN or a password, something that the customer has, that might be kind of a soft token or a card and a card reader, and then something that the customer is, right? Their face, their fingerprint. And obviously the most secure of those is something that you are. It's much harder for me to kind of replicate a facial structure or a fingerprint than it is for me to kind of guess a 4-digit PIN. And so, you know, the real opportunity for banks is to leverage things like, you know, biometrics that now exist and are now commonplace, to make it easy and seamless for you, the consumer, but far more secure for you as well. And I guess that's where we're going in the payment space. If I come back to your kind of pre-statement before the question around this kind of, you know, this exponential growth of the platform providers, the WeChats, the Googles, the Amazons, all these kind of platforms that are growing and growing exponentially. They're on the fringes of financial services, while kind of regulation is probably catching up. And I think that's why we're still seeing that banks have got this pivotal role at the moment in terms of kind of partnering and being the accessibility for the bigger platforms into the banking space. You know, even though, you know, Amazon's, Google's, Facebook's are gradually acquiring banking licenses, I think they're still at the point where they're looking at what is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world and going, this is not our area of expertise. Our area of expertise is providing great digital experiences. And so what you're starting to see is kind of partnering with banks who are very experienced in terms of navigating this complex regulation. And I think going forward, that's potentially a model that will continue to work, right? It's who can partner the best, not who can kind of outcompete somebody else, but playing to your strengths within this marketplace, and meeting the need that you can. And at the same time, you know, we'll wait and see how regulation continues to develop. I think, you know, banking regulation is still probably behind where the technology is at the moment. And so we're seeing this period of catch up as our regulators really starting to get comfortable around the technology that now exists and allowing us to use it to its maximum effect.
Yeah, so the regulatory thing is interesting because, of course, when you know, you pick up The Economist and you read about what's happening in parts of China or India, and it's, as you said, clearly the technology exists. So there must be lots of concerns about its rollout and things like that. But again, APIs, which probably 10 years ago weren't being discussed that much in banks. I know they're becoming central to a lot of what's happening here in the UAE, but they're also being mentioned a lot in the UK. And you did talk about partnership between different kinds of organizations. So, I mean, how are you working with APIs, and how does RBS kind of experiment and test API solutions?
Yeah, so we are rapidly becoming what I would call a bank of APIs, and we recognize that like we will compete going forward based on the openness and accessibility of our infrastructure, right? The banks that will kind of win and still be here in the long term will be the banks that were the quickest to open up and become really easy and seamless to connect with. So we are absolutely prioritizing the development of our suite of APIs that make it easy for fintech providers and even our clients to kind of directly integrate with us, right? As you move up from kind of the retail space and into the large corporate and institutional space, you hit upon banking clients who have got their own systems, and they're multi-banked, and they will always be multi-banked. And what they really want is a way of being able to kind of aggregate all of their banking services, connect it seamlessly with accounting software and other bits and pieces. And how easy you are to connect with is fundamental in terms of how competitive you are in that space. And so, we are investing heavily in making sure that we've got readily accessible APIs, and also that we're well equipped to make use of other participants' APIs and deliver, additional value-added services to our customers seamlessly.
Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting because before I was in the UAE, I was living in a mainly cash-based society in Jordan. And I remember going back to the UK and feeling kind of like someone from the Stone Age, because one of my friends paid with her iPhone. I was like, what that? This was some years ago, to be fair. But I was like, what the hell was that? And as you said, you've got the identity thing on the iPhone. So that's kind of a layer of security, which arguably makes it more secure than paying with your card. And then I don't know how it works, but there must be some API or something that connects through to your bank or your card and processes that through. But what was interesting about that for me was the layered aspect of the technology, and that somehow, the biometrics or the identity-based system on your phone was giving you access to Apple Pay. Apple Pay was somehow connected to your bank, and your bank was somehow, paying for that pizza or whatever it was. And even that for me was kind of interesting, because the idea of doing that on my phone was relatively new. And yesterday we had a discussion with Brett King, who suggested that's just going to accelerate. He gave a hypothetical argument that you could walk in with your AR glasses in 5 years' time and pay for a coffee without doing very much at all. Is that kind of one of the holy grails for banks as well? That kind of seamless identity-based payment system, and will that be API based, or are banks also looking at things like the blockchain?
Yeah, so great question. And again, if I just kind of rewind slightly, this probably points to that cultural shift in the bank, where we recognize that the best way to deliver innovation is through partnership, right? So in order to kind of deliver that seamless pay on your phone experience, there are a number of participants that make that possible. Historically, I think banks would have had that siloed mentality around, we don't want to work with anybody else. Like, how do we deliver all of that end to end? And the reality is that, like, going forward, banks cannot be silos. It's not a castle that you build walls around. Instead, you are kind of a tree in a big interconnected ecosystem, right? And you will only thrive in that system through connection. So we get that, and it's in the customer's best interest as well, because it delivers experiences like the one that you outlined. Absolutely love Brett King in terms of his kind of future focus, and whether it's Google Glasses, whether it's an embedded chip in our bodies. Like, I don't know where the future goes, and I'll leave it to people like him. I think for the bank, because that future is somewhat uncertain, like nobody could predict that COVID was coming, and nobody can predict exactly where we're going to be in 5 years' time. So instead, what you've got to build is the capability that allows you to adapt and flex irrespective of what the future starts to look like. And that's where it's so important that we build that kind of openness in our architecture, so that we can connect with any partner. so that we can embed ourselves into any kind of device, whether it's Google Glass or whatever that future thing might be. I personally think mobiles will be around for a while. I think it will be a little time before we kind of make the leap from a separate device into something that's embedded, but I'm not saying it's never going to happen. The mobile phone has already become the extension of our physical self, right? Like absolutely, I haven't touched money for 18 months, right? All of my transactions are done via mobile. I carry digital ID kind of on my mobile phone. I think that will continue to be the future. People are far more likely to change their physical address than they are an email address or a phone number. Like these things are almost things that become yours for life now. And so at some point soon, we will make that transition to like that becomes your indisputable digital ID, and you'll release that to people as you want to. And all of these kind of friction processes that are, KYC and physical passports and all that kind of stuff will start to disappear in favor of kind of undisputable digital identities that are linked purely to you.
Yeah, that is kind of fascinating. Yeah, I mean, that kind of role of digital identity and all of that seems to be accelerating incredibly fast all around the world. But just to kind of end on a more cerebral note, so we had a call with a banker in Europe, Mr. Pedro Pinto, who was talking about the kind of fintech ecosystem in the EU, and was saying, look, one of our problems is you have potentially networks like Facebook with 2.8 billion customers. Let's think of it as any platform with upwards of 100 million customers. And were they to start launching payment solutions, they would potentially have access to cross-border transactions that are very difficult for European banks. European banks have KYCs. Despite open banking, we have different regulations in almost every single European member state. And he basically argued that this is one of the greatest challenges holding banks back: jurisdictional laws, the role of the nation state, and how do you compete against that when the future of finance is moving into the cloud, is moving online, is moving into networks with far more people than any single nation state. Now, you guys are based, you're saying that historically you're concentrating more on the UK market now. But what about internationalization? What about moving these services, outside of the UK? Are banks still, or the banking system still siloed within nation states? And is this a discussion that people have, or is this a discussion that is still some way off? Because when you see the world from cyberspace rather than from the banking institution, it seems to be a kind of longer term but really serious issue.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and something that certainly all banks are wrestling with, and the one that I work for is very active in this space, right? As you think about these kind of global platforms with global reach, and their ability to really seamlessly move money across borders, like that's kind of a hitting on a historic place where banks used to make a lot of revenue, right, in cross-border transactions, and all of that is kind of on a race towards zero now, because it should be real-time settlement that costs nobody nothing. So the best bet for banks is not to try and fight against that tide, but in fact figure out a way to kind of surf those waves, right? And it's not about competing; it's about, well, how do you really form an essential part within this mix? And it goes back to probably one of the things that I hit on earlier around, the skill set of the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles is not navigating payment regulation, right? It's about providing the digital experience and the digital capability. And in fact, the opportunity is not to compete, but to partner, and for banks to start and really leverage their strength and experience of, we have relationships with these regulators. We have a strong track record of being able to navigate this kind of complexity. And so I think what we're going to continue to see is an increase in terms of partnerships, and we'll start and see business model shift in what banks do, right? It won't be, we generate a lot of revenue from net interest margin and interchange fees and cross-border transaction fees, like that will all start and minimize. And instead kind of, banking as a service, whether that's access to payment rails, payment schemes, whether it's access to kind of regulatory guidance and support, like that will start and become the future business model for banks, is being facilitators within this space rather than end-to-end providers of everything.
That makes total sense, and there's some historical analogies with what was going on in Venice and other parts of Europe many centuries ago in terms of banking trade, with what you just said there. But I guess it's, as you said at the start of this call, while banks are changing, banking isn't going anywhere. So thanks a lot for your time today, Jamie, and hope to see you in Dubai later this year in October.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and yeah, looking forward to hopefully continuing the conversation there.